Welcome, welcome. I'm John. Today is a treat. One of my favorite people, Lucina Sinclair. Lucina is the head of membership at 67 Pall Mall in London. 67 is the preeminent social club for people who are interested in wine. So there are members from the wine industry, there are people who are collectors, and of course, there are both younger people and older people, including me. And what's great about the club is that you have this diverse group of people and they have a common interest in wine, but from there, kind of anything goes. Lou specifically is super interesting. She came into the club with kind of a novice level of wine knowledge, has since taken classes and gotten really interested in it, but fits kind of the demographic of a younger person who really is learned to explore wine. And so without much further ado, here's Lou. There you go. So what is fun about this for me is that I got to know you just when you started. So so you've been there for a while now, but I want to kind of go backward. I want to talk about you, and then we could talk about your job and stuff like that. So you have a super interesting background because you are a little bit more international than the average person. So let's kind of talk through your little life story and then get ourselves up to taking the job in London.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I call myself an international hybrid, global citizen. I had the privilege of being raised by two individuals who love to travel the world. They were yes men and women in their own right. So I was born in Tokyo because of my dad's job, relocated back to the UK, raised here up until around the age of 13. Then my dad's job again moved us to the States. I was in the States for grade school, high school, and then obviously I went off to uni. So by the time I was in uni freshman year, my dad again relocated the family back to the UK. But because I was studying, I spent the last 18 years, my formative years in the US. So studied in the South in New Orleans, then relocated to Los Angeles, and then spent the last kind of 8 years of my tenure in the States in New York City. And then as of the beginning of last year, 2025, in January, I relocated back to London, quote unquote, home. And the big reason for that was I've worked in the entertainment industry in the US, studied there. Then I kind of pivoted, moved into the hospitality space, specific within the membership club space, did that for 8 years, absolutely loved it, but was getting a bit bored, which you don't hear about. New York's not a boring city, but being someone who has that travel bug and gets that itch, I was ready to then bring my skill set that I had learned and kind of cultivated in the US to the European market, which arguably is very different. If you look at all of the major markets of hospitality, each have their own highlights, each have their own pitfalls. And it was important to me as a growing professional. Arguably, I always say I'm in the prime of my life. People keep saying I'm too young to say that yet, but take all of the learnings that I had in the States and then apply them to the European market and learn about the European market in tandem.
So let's frame up the Soho experience. So talk a little bit because this is really meant for people in the wine industry. But of course, who knows who's paying attention to this, and especially if they are my age or older, they may not know. But talk through a little bit about Soho generally, and then your role there, so that we can kind of frame up why you being with me right now is like so appropriate to the discussion about younger people.
It was a bizarre move, really, because I had worked in entertainment for 12 years plus as an A&R. Those who are listening, A&R is artist and repertoire. It's a very fancy name for record executive. I was placing, top liners who are writers and singers with producers. These individuals would make a record. They'd either release it under their own pseudonym, or my job would be to place said record with a major artist on the label. A lot of, if you boil down that role, a lot of it is talent scouting. So you're out, you're going to gigs, you're trying to find the next big thing, right? And then back in the day, A&R was all about development. So you would develop this artist, you would, hone in on their craft, and then you try to pinpoint their fan base. And then those are the territories that you would go to for things like radio, or now with the DSPs, digital streaming platforms, the territories that you would target. So when I moved to New York in 2019, I was ready to make a pivot out of the gig that I had at that period, which was working for Pete Tong, who is a dear mentor, friend, and an amazing guy to work with. I cannot speak more highly of him and his team. I hit my ceiling within his framework as his head of A&R. We did everything from, gigs at the Royal Albert Hall to the Hollywood Bowl, to starting a publishing company together, to obviously programming his BBC show. But yeah, I'd hit my ceiling. There was really no mobility within that gig and under that bracket to kind of go further in. So when I went to New York and relocated, there were two job offers on the table at that time. One was director of publishing at Universal. So I'd be on the publishing side of music, where I was actually on the record side, although I did publishing with Pete. And then there was this Soho House opportunity. And for me, music will forever be a passion of mine, but I did start to resent the industry. It's changed dramatically since like the pioneers like Jimmy Iovine were in the space, which is kind of like why I got into it, to now it being way more data driven. And take that what you will. I'm not here to speak poorly about the music industry. It just wasn't for me anymore. Whereas Soho House, they had actually developed a role for me. So it wasn't an active role before I started. The role itself was called Membership Outreach Manager. And why they, I would say, took the plunge on hiring me is because arguably I was talent scouting in entertainment, and now I would be talent scouting for the club. So for a company like Soho House at that point in time, it was about 25 years old. They don't need to do guerrilla marketing. And I would speak about this with a lot of membership clubs. You're never going to be like in the subway or the tube and see like, join Soho House flyers, right? It's very word of mouth. It's very reference based. And a place like Soho House, they have such a, competitive application process. So for me, I didn't necessarily have to worry about the members who, or the current applications who had applied. It was my job to like be out on the streets, boots on the ground, and scout talent for the club. So for instance, you have three properties in New York. You have the Meatpacking property, which is their flagship in New York. That's in Chelsea. You have Ludlow House, which is based on the Lower East Side. And then you have Dumbo, which is their newest property in New York, and that's in Brooklyn. Each of those areas of Manhattan, New York are very starkly different. So, a place like Meatpacking, it was my goal to focus on like, okay, who's in this surrounding area? Who do we want to know about the house? Come join us, and then arguably apply for membership. So I would target like the Googles, right, that were down the street. Whereas Ludlow House, it was more focused on like entrepreneur kind of brick and mortar. So a lot of, art galleries, for instance. Whereas Dumbo, especially when I was working, not back in the day, but it had had a massive tech boom and a lot of young families. So it was my job to basically bring in 20% of the annual intake, which means the annual amount of members that join into the club. And I would target these organizations and these people, and I would bring them into the club, and I would host them for something called a social hour, wine, cheese, a very candid conversation with me on membership, just telling them about our membership, our offerings, and why I think they should join. Off the back of that, the argument would be that one of the executives, one of the people from leadership within that group of 5, 6, 8 would then join, receive an expedited membership through committee, and then be, one of our kind of highlighted members in the space. So I took the Soho House gig for many reasons. I grew up, working back of house. My parents put me to work at 15. I was a porter, paid my way through school being a chef. So hospitality is in my ethos as a human and in the fabric of who I am. So it felt like an easy transition. And also, a lot of the executives that I worked with in music were already members of Soho House. So
yeah, let me just jump in real quick, because
yeah,
I want to frame this up because it becomes important to your current gig. So
yeah,
Soho, for those who might not know, was really kind of the
Yeah.
preeminent leader in the private
Of
club
of
space.
membership base,
Yeah,
yeah.
and focused
Especially
really.
across the
Yes.
especially across yeah.
And what was always interesting about it was its attraction toward creative people, right? Instead of this model of a private club for just
Right,
a bunch of finance people to sit around, or
right.
lawyers, or to sit
Yeah.
around and talk about the way they were going to make money. It was a more creative
It was a
environment.
creative hub, right? For creatives by creatives. And it did that for a really long time. It gave, people within the creative space, whatever it may be, um, a place to work, a place to, network, a place to engage with your fellow community. And, it was a really competitive business model. And I think that with London being the home of membership clubs, I would argue that Soho was the first kind of like introduction to what a membership club is in the States, which is why it's done so well. Um,
Yeah, it's definitely different. So when I was a young lawyer, we always had like lunch clubs in our cities, but it was almost exclusively focused on that particular demographic,
it's
right? It was
business,
lawyers
right?
and business.
Yeah,
And this at least Soho was the introduction to this different type of model, right?
yeah.
Which is
They were the
more inclusive.
disruptors in a way.
Yeah.
Right, right, exactly. And like obviously times change. I think that the fees for membership at Soho House were very competitive at the time that I started working there, or the tail end where creatives could arguably still afford it. What we have to understand though is people who are young A&Rs, young managers, publishers, tour managers, production assistants, whatever it may be, they're not making more than 60 grand, you know, and arguably before they become a director, right? And then there's a lot of luck involved, especially in entertainment. So it's hard to keep that business model alive when you're catering to a group of individuals who may not actually have that kind of income. So I think that that's where the club pivoted and changed directions. And like at the end of my tenure, obviously, like Soho Works was developed and that came out in the US. And, the fees went up. And I think that the doors opened to a wider range of individuals. And that's when you saw MDs and you saw lawyers and you saw people in tech in the houses. And the member base felt that, right? And it's hard for me to sell a product that I can't believe in or I can't stand behind, which is why, after the 3 5 years that I worked there, I pivoted out, not because I owe so much to that company. Like they gave me my footing, they gave me my start. But for me, I'm so authentic and I never like to say I work in sales. So it just became more and more difficult to sit with those members and say, no, no, you're wrong. This is why you should still be here. When like I really heard their concerns and was almost standing in the same position as them as if I was still working in the record industry.
So I promise we're going to get to the current job, but I think it's important the framing, your like professional framing. And by the way, have you noticed that so many professionals in the wine industry came from music? Have you noticed that?
Oh
Because it's the
yeah,
wildest thing.
yeah,
And I
no.
don't know.
Well, I think that it's just a normal pivot, right? It's like if you have worked in an industry, major money, major impact, kind of carved out your legacy, like a lot of people don't want to retire these days, right? And it's because we love what we do. And if you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life. So I think that a lot of people from these spaces, whether it is tech or whether it is entrepreneurship or if it is entertainment, an easy pivot would then be, okay, what is my passion? It could be whiskey, it could be wine, it could be art. But yeah, to your point, there are a lot of people who have now said, okay, wine is now my focus.
Let's do wine first. Okay, so prior
Yeah.
to this, like gig, um,
Yes.
tell me about your like experience with wine, like the way you thought about it. If we could go in the
Sure.
Wayback Machine a whole year, um,
Yeah.
like what you thought about it and like what it was, how it was involved at all in your life, if at all.
Yeah, so being raised by Brits, right? My parents used to love hosting dinner parties. They did it here in the UK, they did it in the US. I was always a part of those dinner parties, right? Like whether I was 7, 10, 14, I'd be invited to the dinner table. My parents didn't believe in a children's table, and they'd water down my wine. And my parents were always drinking wine, and they were drinking good wine. And there would be those kind of like BYOB dinners or like discussions around wine that I was just a fly on the wall with. I think that also growing up as a European or a Brit in the US, my my way of drinking, my relationship with drinking was starkly different from that of my peers. It was never this kind of like don't touch it, it's the devil, like you have to wait till you're 21. Like there was always this conversation around alcohol, specifically wine, right? It's not like my parents were making me like martinis, but like it never seemed that like this big kind of like black cloud that I needed to stay away from. So a lot of my peers, especially growing up and going into uni, I would argue it was similar to like what people call in the US like sessions, like a lot of binge drinking and a lot of liquor drinking. And just, the reason for drinking was to, drink too much. Whereas for me, I always enjoyed the taste of specific wine or the taste of a specific liquor. So I felt like I was always one step ahead of my peers, if not two or three. So I developed my palate quite early on. And, first you're drinking, your Merlots or your Cab Sauves or your Pinot Grigios or, California Chardonnays. And then you start talking to, it would be my folks, right? And that's when my mom introduces me to things like Chablis or Sancerre, or my dad starts introducing me to Gamay. And I start learning about blends and territories. And then, so for me, it was, I owe a lot to my folks to give me that foundation. And then, living in Brooklyn, I was so lucky because there's so many organic wine stores there and so many amazing wine restaurants, focused wine restaurants there, that I could even dive into my palate even further. I always knew that I enjoyed it. I never once saw it as something that I'd work in, but I think that's the beauty of it. Like and we'll talk about 67, but I do believe the job picked me as much as I picked it, because, I was honing into something that I had so much love for, but I never necessarily saw it as something that I would become, a professional in that space.
So I want to get into your experience going to 67. Now, of course,
Yeah,
I've talked a little bit about the club in the intro, but part of your being brought on was this massive global expansion of the brand and of the clubs, and
right,
so in they bring somebody with your experience. Um,
right.
Talk to me a little bit when you say it chose you as much as you chose it, sort of thing. Talk to me about some of those things from your perspective. And then also, now that you've been there, like what it was that they were going for in order to bring
Sure.
you on, because obviously you've brought a lot of energy to the job and stuff like that that I see as a member. Um, but talk it through, because I find this part pretty interesting.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, hats off to 67 for hiring a Yank. I don't believe that there's been someone with my personality within the four walls of this specific space before. Um, but, for me, I think that it speaks boatloads about a company in terms of their hiring process, how transparent it is. Again, going back to Soho House, the one thing that really set it apart from, say, working in entertainment was that not only did I meet my director within that interview process, but I met the MD of North America. And then I also got to meet Nick Jones, who was the CEO at that time. And in entertainment, there'd be very far and few between moments where you would meet the Craig Cowmans, the Wendy Goldsteins, the Mike Cairns of the room, all of which I've worked for in the past. So, that translated to 67 when I interviewed here. I got to meet the global head of membership. I got to meet the GM. I got to meet our founder, Grant Ashton. And so it came from a really holistic point of view where it became very clear that this is a boutique company operating on a global scale. And that was really exciting to me. Um, Now, how the job picked me and I picked it, I mean, a fun like talking point is when I saw the job listed, I only knew Pall Mall in terms of the cigarettes. And I was like, hang on
Oh,
a second. Like, like there's a membership club for cigarettes. That's bizarre. And I don't smoke personally. So then I dove deeper into it and I was like, no way, it's about wine. Okay.
well, wait.
And
Let's make sure that people internationally understand that this is like literally the name
so
of a
yes,
road. Okay,
right. So
this is the
Pall
address.
Mall is an address, and it is a very historic address. We are literally across the street from St. James's Palace, which was arguably the first palace pre-Buckingham. So this is an area, and like we have stores down on St. James that survived pre-Blitz, right? So when we talk about history, like this area of London has so much history. It's so tangible. It's also known, as the Gentlemen's Club Strip, right?
Right.
You've got the RAC down the road, you've got Oxford, Cambridge, you've got White's that still doesn't allow females in. So it's very traditional in that sense. Now, what I love about Pall Mall and what became very apparent during my interview process, as well as after working here for, 9, 10 months, is that for me, there's certain industries that are gate kept, whether it's music, fine art, whiskey, like you name it. There's people within these industries that like to overcomplicate it. And what I love about Pall Mall is that education is at like the foundation of what we do here. And it felt to me that the club was willing and open and eager to step into that 21st century mindset and like know it was 2025 and now 2026, and that you don't have to be a connoisseur, a sommelier, have taken any of your degrees to be welcome here, right? You just have to have prioritized wine in some shape or form, be it professionally or personally. And I felt like I fit that bucket, right? Like I knew that I would be able to speak up this business model and bring people into the club, but also look after our current member base from a really authentic point of view, because I feel welcome here. And I've learned, tons here just by being a fly on the wall, but sitting with our Psalms and sitting with our leadership team. And everyone wants to share their knowledge of wine here. And I think that it's wonderful to be in a space where we're here to facilitate your palate, where literally any day you come, morning, evening, night, and you have a conversation with someone on the floor, you will be learning something, right? And you will
Right.
feel a part of something that's bigger than yourself. And then on top of that, you can engage with a community of individuals who do know way more than you or who are just novices. And you can kind of have that beautiful communication between, let's say, like an under 30 member compared to someone in their 50s who has been investing in wine since they were that age.
Yeah, I've always had this theory um, that there is no kind of like wine person. So even
Right.
in the wine industry, or people who just have interest in it, or collectors, or whatever, the only thing they have in common, for the most part, right, is kind of they're interesting. For almost
Right.
always, they're interesting because it's kind of a weird thing, frankly, to get into, but you did. So now
Right.
you are kind of a wine person from childhood in the sense you've drunk it, but not a wine person like industry person. And
Right.
next thing I know, you're like taking W set, you're like moving along. So talk to me about your like level of enthusiasm now that you're
Sure.
there, what you've picked up on, and what you've enjoyed about that, probably other
Sure.
than studying for tests, I
Well,
assume,
I
right?
think, okay, so I'm dyslexic, right?
Oh, I didn't know
So
that.
and being dyslexic, you have to work harder than everyone else when it comes to academia, right? And I took academia very seriously, so much so that I decided to do an FU to the world and become a journalist major, So for me, like, how I operate is knowledge is power. Like, if you have the opportunity to learn something, then go for it, right? And going back to what the club offers, I mean, I came into the club and I remember sitting with one of our head psalms and I told him, I go, I drink everything but Chardonnay. And he said, Lucina, that is never coming out of your mouth ever again. Okay. He's like, you've been in the States for too long. So he put together a tasting for me of all Chardonnay blends. I mean, including Burgundy, which is now my go-to. And literally every single one, I was like, yep, love this, love this. And he said, see, like there is so much more to Chardonnay than maybe what you are aware of. And the way that he did that, it didn't come across from, a place of like, look what I know and you're so stupid. It came across from a place of, oh my goodness, I'm sorry that you've been pigeonholed into that palette. Let me now expand your knowledge. And so when I must have been maybe a month in, and our head som came up to me and said, do you want to take your W set too? And of course, I was game, because more so, you know, working here, head of membership, obviously, John, I'll sit with our members, and everyone wants to treat. Everyone wants to share. And what I didn't want is to sit with a member, let's say, who's cracking open a 2002 Dom or a 1980s port, or, a vintage Magnum. And my only feedback is delicious, thank you. Right? Like what W Set 2 gave me is a foundation that I can really, we can dive deeper into the conversation. And I feel like I'll learn more. I'm also sharing my knowledge, and in turn becoming just as more proficient in what I'm learning as they are. So I think for me, it's the fact that the company is open to you not knowing anything, but also open to you like learning more, and, doing it in layman's terms is amazing. Like the other day, a colleague of mine and I were sitting at the bar upstairs, just finishing a meeting. One of our senior somms put some tastings in front of us. And the way that he described it was, he was talking about how if the red is a deep color, that means it's been fermented longer. If the legs on the wine glass are thick and long, there's more alcohol in it. Like he wasn't speaking at it from a point of like scientific knowledge or like a way that we couldn't understand. So I think it's nice that you can sit with a som, or you can sit with a colleague, or sit with a fellow member, and they're going to say it to you in a very colloquial way. So you can say, especially the way my mind works, is okay, now I understand that. Now I can format it into maybe something that sounds a little more professional, but at least I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I think this is a hump that in general is problematic for younger people, because that feeling of like, I don't like Chardonnay,
It's
I think is pretty
intimidating,
normal,
right?
right? And
Right.
then that experience, it's fun, but this is obviously a little bit different, right? Because we are talking about how to reach those people, but a
Yeah.
lot of the people who come to the club, who come for membership to the club, who are younger, obviously fit a
Mm,
little bit of a different profile. So we have
totally.
all ages at the club.
Yeah.
Um, there's certainly people who are older, but we have a lot of younger members. So let's talk a little bit, as head of membership, about what you see as people are coming in. What sort of profile do they have? And how do you add that extra layer of excitement to a younger person who is interested in exploring
Sure.
their
So
wine
I'd
passion?
I'd say that I put my feet in the shoes of a potential member, every day. And, being in my younger 30s myself, I think that, it shouldn't be intimidating, it should be welcoming. And I think that being on Pall Mall, we're not bound by a dress code here, which I think separates us from a lot of clubs. Like, I like to think that if you're a member, regardless of your age, I want you to be in the area and say, oh, shoot, my club's next door. I fancy popping in. Not, oh, shoot, my club's next door, but I don't have my tie with me. Right. So that's one aspect of it, is like allowing it. When we say like the doors are open to anyone, we truly mean it. But then also, I think that for that young professional coming into their first real paycheck, I think that they are looking to spend their money and their time in an environment that is inviting and also that's cost effective. Like what we have at Pall Mall, like business model wise, because of our founders' relationships with like vineyards, merchants, buyers, etc. You know, the wine that we offer, which is 5,000 bottles, 1,000 by the glass, it's a 30% markup. outside of the four walls of Pall Mall, let alone St. James or Green Park, like you're not going to see that. It's going to be 100, 150, sometimes 300% markup. So when you look at our menu, even from a price perspective, it's not intimidating, right? But also on top of that, I think that ever since I've joined, actually, we've seen an uptick in our under 35 and our under 30 community because you have a few different aspects. You have people who work in the area and they forever walked by 67 and now all of a sudden they're like, okay, what is this place? I want to find out. Then you have people who have attended as a guest from a member. Maybe they haven't gone to any of our events, but they've appreciated the space, they've come to a private dining room hire, etc. Or you have the individual who is a guest of an event that we've hosted, whether it's a master class or bringing in someone to chat, with our community. And when it comes to our events, I mean, they're unparalleled, right? Because we can bring in people like Olivier Krug. We can bring in people like Michelle Drapier. These individuals don't do consumer events, right? Like they're not interested in hiring out like, a corporate space and just speaking to people who had the money to pay for a ticket. They would much rather work with us because we have a arguably pre-vetted community of individuals who are passionate about the product. So it's like an engaging environment for both the event partner as well as our members. So I think for us, it's just about, you know, opening the four walls, inviting them into the conversation and not having it feel pretentious or elitist, but still elevated that can fit their movements, right? You can empty your inbox here on your computer. You can host a business meeting. You can come to an event. You can wine and dine with colleagues or friends. You can celebrate, a big anniversary. I think that the space itself here in London, as well as across the board, we work with our members' movements and then we execute within that. Like humans are variables. It's not a one size fits all business model, right? So you have to like work with who that individual is and then figure out what are their movements, what do they want out of the club, and how can I, as head of membership, head of events, leadership, be able to cater to them within the four walls.
One of the things that you will have a unique perspective on. Obviously, I spend a considerable amount of time in London. I consider it, well, it's not only kind of the center of social clubs, right? It is the center of the wine world in many ways, especially the commercial
Right.
wine world. Is how people, especially younger people, think about wine. So you have both sides, obviously.
Yeah.
The Yankee. It's funny because you conveniently are a Yank when you like it, but
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
you grew up in a
Yeah. It's
British
fine.
family.
It's just an identity crisis in real time.
Yeah.
It's fine.
So talk to me just a little bit about what you see as the differences between people of your age or a little bit younger who
Yeah.
have grown up, right, in London and their relationship with wine versus the people that you knew at university and whatever in the United States.
I think that, I mean, and we're going to touch upon this, but I think that there's this like common like talking point going around in the hospitality space right now, especially if you sell alcohol, that people aren't drinking as much, especially the younger generation. And I would actually argue that that's not the case, especially like being in that bucket. I think that individuals, the younger generation, I don't think it's that they're drinking less. I think that they're just being more specific with where they want to drink, who they want to drink with, the environment that they want to drink in. I think that you're seeing a downtick in like people having sessions, or binge drinking in the States and like going out to the pubs and the bars, right? But, and now they're seeking out areas that they feel safe in. They're seeking out places that they could still, maybe have one too many, but it's a safe environment and that they're drinking, a quality of wine, right? And I mean, we also serve, your classic cocktails here, Negroni, Martini, whatever it may be. And we also have, one IPA and one Pilsner on tap. But for us, I think it's about just quality over anything else. If you drink a really nice bottle of wine, you won't feel the need to then have your tequila shot afterwards, right? And I also think it brings people together, and especially after COVID, The younger generation, they're struggling with that. They're struggling with like that community, that communication. And I think that having places like members clubs specifically, it encourages that. So I think that the difference is if you've prioritized, wine in some shape or form, this is going to be a place that encourages you to want to be here. You don't have to be dressed to the nines. You don't have to know, all of the aspects of wine, but you know that you're going to drink the best and be educated by the best, but also you're going to be in a really friendly and conducive environment for that.
Yeah, and I don't think that we really have a lot of barriers as far as age, right? Because it's at the club and
Yeah.
there's a commonality there. But I want to take you like outside of the club and just like a wine industry commentary.
Yeah.
What are the things that if you were the president of the wine industry for a day, what are the things that you would say, all right, these are the tricks to get younger people into wine?
I think that we need to debunk wine. I think that, you go into any restaurant and they hand you a wine list, like it is overwhelming. And the last thing that people want to do is tell that som or that server, like, I don't know where to start. So I think that it's important for the wine industry to give those who may be interested in foraying into it more heavily the kind of like key touch points on like what wine is, what certain grapes are, what blends are, what regions are, in a format that they can understand. Like if you love your Whispering Angel rosé, right?
Right.
Then you will also like X, Y, and Z. Like if you are a Chardonnay drinker, Barefoot Contessa, you are going to like X, Y, and Z. I think it's like we need in the wine world to understand that those who are foraying into it, regardless of age, they don't know these things. So you can't be talking about Petrus to someone who arguably doesn't know what it is, may never have the funds to try it, but introducing them to a wine that is of market value that's similar. Working with the places like the Tesco's or the Sainsbury's or the Stop and Shops in the US and really labeling the wine sections better than just this is Italy, this is France, this is South Africa. I think what's great about boutique wine stores, especially, is that they have like the tasting notes on it, right? And you have like great representation within those stores to really kind of like walk you through like what you're looking for. Oh, you're eating this tonight. Okay, then I would recommend this, right? I think it's just about making it idiot proof in a way that you can then go into a restaurant, a wine store, and say, cool, I have the foundation, I have the base, I have the keywords in order to navigate this, whether it's talking to someone or just looking at a menu.
Yeah, so when I was talking to a Sam in Las Vegas, and what's really interesting is we were talking about her day, and she was pointing out the tables are drinking wine and how she's going to serve them. And I said, "Did you talk to the tables that are drinking cocktails?" She goes, "I really don't," you know. And just that
Right.
kind of training of like talking to the cocktail people, making them feel comfortable, like, oh, next time you eat that, try this, is
Yeah,
really important.
exactly. Or even like for me, a big thing that I do is like a welcome glass of bubbles or like talking to the table, just as they're starting to peruse the menu and saying to them like, what are we eating tonight, or what are you in the mood for? Oh, you're looking for a burgundy. I would love to treat you to my favorite. And that kind of like jump starts the conversation of someone who would just probably either order a bottle they've always ordered or go for their classic cocktail, right? I think it's about inserting yourself into the conversation. And obviously, this comes with finesse and time, and you have to know how to gauge people because every person is different and not every person wants that. But I think inserting yourself in a shameless manner that comes from like, an education like space and wanting to treat and wanting to share, I think that's like, that has to be at the root of like the service industry, but also every industry that serves alcohol as well.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, growing up, before Pall Mall, if I wanted to like treat someone to a nice bottle of champagne, it would be Moet or Veuve. And why is that? It's because it's good marketing. And it's because people my age, that's all we see, or Dom, right? That's all we see is like the best. And it's like, I think that there needs to be more understanding of like, okay, this price point, you can get this, but you can get something so much better and boutique and maybe like not as branded, but not to say that it doesn't taste better if not worth more for your money, right?
Yep. So before we end, let's do our little advertisement. So
Okay.
what's cool about 67, other than the fact that it's kind of this global expansion, is it is unique in the sense that there is a nice, good contingent of wine industry people. In fact, the club has a tiered membership that is a little less expensive for those
Yes.
in the wine industry. So, why don't we talk a little bit about how wine professionals fit into the ecosystem at the club
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
why it's important, and then we've done our duty to
Yeah. So, I
67.
mean, from a business model, we do have tiered memberships. I think what separates 67 from other clubs is that everyone is a global member. So, as we scale, regardless of where your, home membership is, whether you applied in London or Verbier or Singapore, you have access to all of these clubs. So that's one benefit, right? You are global, and each property, while it looks very different, like the Verbier one is a chalet and the Singapore one is like a beautiful old penthouse, right? Whereas on 67, we look like this beautiful townhouse and we're right next to Marlborough House. There's a lot of history here. When you walk through the four walls, you remember, you realize, and you feel like you're in a 67 property. But also, we tier out our membership. So we have a discounted rate for our under 30s because we want to, you know, introduce the new age and the new drinkers and the new wine connoisseurs into the space at a discounted rate. But then also, we have a wine professional membership as well. So if you work in the space, obviously we want you in here. Not only maybe want to share your wines, but also you guys are going to have, those individuals are going to have the network to be our like quote unquote ambassadors, right? Then we have our overseas membership, which is great, especially for those who are, they don't have a physical 67 property within the area that they're in, be it the States, somewhere in, Northern Ireland, somewhere in the Middle East. And then we have our London, annual membership, which is for those who stay here. So for us, I think it's like we're really working around people's movements, their age, their income, with the idea and hopes that they will grow with us.
Yep, and nice blend. So, for those of you who feel like that may or may not fit me, you might be
It
surprised
does.
that it does. Yeah, and
It does.
so Luke, thank you so much for doing this. I really,
Oh
really
my God.
appreciate it.
Thank you. It was
And
awesome.
and I guess we have to go back to work.
I think so.
Yeah,
But come visit me soon. When are you doing
I
London?
know. I will be there again soon. I just left, of course, and what is funny about it is that I always come in April, right?
Okay.
And this year I came a little bit early. So it turns out that for the person who lives in Florida and South America, that it's chilly. But now as we're heading
Yes.
into spring, I'm ready. I'm ready to come back.
Yeah. Okay, good. Well, come visit soon.